Well, welcome back to the show one more time. Bjorn Lomborg, who's the president of the Copenhagen Consensus Center. I want to call you a climatologist, but is that a correct title for you?
I'm not even sure it is a title, but I'm an academic. I'm actually a political scientist, but I work with lots of economists to look at smart solutions for climate.
The book, False Alarm, How Climate Change Panic Cost Us Trillions, Hurts the Poor, and Fails to Fix the Planet. So much to get into with Bjorn and Lomborg, LOMBORG.com is where you can go for that is his website. Are you in Sweden right now?
I'm in Sweden right now, yes.
So I guess we can definitely talk about what's going on in Sweden vis-a-vis COVID, as we've discussed in the past, and you can give us a sort of boots on the ground analysis of that. But climate, always in the news, especially here in the United States. But that then leads me to my first question. So we have a sort of obsession with climate in the United States. How much does that ring true for the rest of the world? I mean, I'm assuming developing nations don't care. I'm guessing places like Sweden have more of an interest in it than China does. But how much talk is there in Sweden or in Western Europe about climate?
Oh, there's at least as much as in the U.S. and in Western Europe. I would actually argue this is mostly a rich world phenomenon. So you have the same thing in Canada, certainly in New Zealand and Australia, with different sort of science in front of that, and also some in Japan. So this is very clearly something that a lot of rich countries worry about. There's also, if you go to China, for instance, it's very clear that there's a big difference between many of those multi-million inhabitant Chinese cities you've never heard of, and then places like Shanghai, where people are quite Western in much of their worriedness. And that also shows up in the surveys. When you survey urban Chinese or urban Indians, quite a few of them are very worried. But of course, you need to sort of gotten past worrying about your kids dying from easily curable infectious diseases and not having enough food to start worrying about what's the temperature going to be like in 79 years.
How much, and I'm just kind of free-forming here, but it doesn't strike me that I hear a lot out of Japan. Now, that's me. I don't study the subject, but it just feels to me like a lot of noise, certainly coming from Trudeau and Canada and many places in Europe, Germany, and beyond. I don't seem to hear a lot out of Japan. Is that a cultural thing? Or are they not as concerned about it?
I'm not an expert in Japan either. It's hard for me to know to what extent it's just simply a language barrier. They promised quite recently to cut a very large number, and I forget exactly how much. And it turned out that the environment minister had seen it in a vision when he was dreaming. That particular number. And all the experts were really worried because it would basically have to tell, this was a Financial Times story, they basically have to start preparing the Japanese people that they wouldn't have much growth for the next decade because of this promise. And as you can imagine, that might not make everyone pleased in Japan.
Is it, could we just sort of rank the concern with climate change by how a country is doing, essentially? I don't want to get into GDP and average life expectancy and stuff, but the more developed, Canada is very developed and very out of problems. Is it sort of the more out of problems your country is, the more you obsess over climate? Could you sort of make that graph? Would it line up pretty clearly?
I think that's very true. I mean, if you ask most poor nations, they obviously have many different concerns. And one of the things that we're seeing now at the climate summit that's just about to start is basically that, China and India still have lots of people, especially India, to lift out of poverty. Africa has 500 million. Clearly, there's a huge issue here, and they are going to focus on that And much of that requires lots of energy and lots of cheap and reliable energy, which very often will be fossil fuels. So clearly, it's much more obvious when you've kind of fixed most problems, you can now start worrying about the temperature in 79 years. It doesn't mean it's not a problem, but it just means that in the big scheme of things, for most people who are really, really suffering on this planet, it's just simply not among the top 10.
Would you say that climate change is very much, let's say, and your approach to it? So your approach to it, and a lot of people I listen to, approach to it is it's sort of analogous to COVID. No one is saying this isn't real. What we're saying is what is the best way to approach this? And what Gavin Newsom, the governor of California, is saying, we need to close down outdoor dining. And what we're saying is that doesn't make sense. And then what he's saying is don't you care about COVID? And everyone's going, yes. We don't want, you're arresting people who are walking on the beach. That's not going to address COVID. And then they go, oh, so you're a COVID denier. And you go, no. We want to figure out the best way to approach this, not argue over whether it exists or not, or paper masks on an airplane or whatever nonsense they've cooked up this week. There's this thing. I feel climate. It's by the way, it's the same people taking the same approach. If you really think about it, guys like you are going, climate change exists. Here's the best way to approach it. And they're saying, we're not going to listen to you because you're a denier.
Yeah, there's certainly a bit of that. And Newsom clearly says, there are lots of fire in California, which is absolutely true. So let's, all go to electric cars, which even if his theory was right, is just simply going to have zero impact even in 80 years from now. And you got to ask yourself, is this just about us feeling good? Is this just about virtue signaling? Or do we actually want to do something that's both actually functional, that'll actually have an impact on climate, and also, of course, politically possible to imagine? Because a lot of these promises that are now being given are essentially promises that politicians themselves know they cannot get through. Once they have to tell their populations how much this is going to cost, the populations are just simply going to say, no, we don't want to pay that. Take one good example. A new Nature study shows that almost getting to Biden's net zero policy in 2050 in the smartest possible way will cost 11.9% of US GDP by 2050. And every year that means each American will have to hand over more than $11,000 every year to fix this climate problem. Clearly, that's not going to happen. Remember, there's a majority in the US against giving $24. Proposing something that's hundreds of times more costly is just simply not going to cut it. And that's why this is not a question, is it a problem? But it's a question of saying your solution is either just virtue signaling, like let's all switch to electric cars right away, or it's so phenomenally expensive, it won't happen.
Do you see, to me, I always think of nuclear power and many subjects that are discussed politically all kind of boil down to that, not specifically, but sort of metaphorically, which is there is this thing that exists. It would help this problem. Those who claim to be concerned with the problem the most are the voices that are loudest against the thing that would be most helpful for the problem that they never stop talking about, which then makes me curious. Do they really believe this problem, or is everything just sort of politicized? And, it was funny. I was watching Bill Maher the other night, and he said, silence is violence. And then he paused and he said, just because it rhymes doesn't make it true. And just because you put no in front of nukes doesn't mean it's true. It just means it starts with the same letter. So is it a situation where politicians, going back to Gavin Newsom, are understand what's going on and are trying to win votes and the populace is misinformed, or do they really believe what's going on? And then also, every 8 years, somebody tells us you have 8 years to live, and it never comes around, but it doesn't seem to faze them. I asked 9 questions there, but
you did.
Go to the nuke
You're
part.
absolutely right. I mean, look, the first UN-sponsored environment conference back in 1972, actually in Stockholm, the organizer, who later went on to be the first UN environment director, said, we have 10 years to avoid the catastrophe. So we've been hearing this for 50 years, and it still hasn't happened. I think there is something, exactly to your point, that if you really worried about climate change, surely you would embrace the only technology we have right now that could actually mitigate this really quickly, which is nuclear. I think it's important to distinguish between 2 different kinds of nuclear. One is the nuclear we've already built. So remember, we build it. We've already plowed in billions of dollars to build it. We've already committed to decommissioning it eventually. Those are the 2 large costs of a nuclear power plant. So fundamentally, while it's running, it's almost free. So what these guys are essentially saying when they're closing down existing power plants is, we have this almost free, CO2-free energy source, but we don't want it. That just does not make any sense whatsoever. It's essentially a promise to say we want higher energy costs, but with more CO2. That's exactly the opposite of what they want. So closing down existing power plants is just stupid. This is what they do in Germany. This is what you're doing in Diablo Canyon in California and many other places, right?
Yes. Well,
wrong idea. Then there's the other one. I want
to talk. I just want to plant this in your head. I do want to talk about how Germany approached this and what happened, and I'll circle back to California, but keep going, Bjorn.
Yeah. All right. The other thing is, should we build more nuclear power plants? And unfortunately, there it seems like that's actually a very costly proposition right now. So the power plants that you're trying to build in Finland and in the UK and many other places turn out to be phenomenally expensive. And so right now, new nuclear is probably not the solution, just simply because it's more expensive than pretty much anything else you can come up with. And that's why we need to investigate how we make 4th generation nuclear much cheaper. But the existing power plants, don't shut them down. If you're shutting them down, it shows you just don't care either about climate nor about the consumers who actually have to pay higher prices for more pollution.
Well, you can tell me, yes, I live in California. What we do is we go, that's a nuclear power plant. We're going to have it shut down by 2021. And then the summer hits and the power grid crashes and we don't have electricity. And then the governor says, well, keep it open for a little while longer. I know Germany said we're going to get rid of all our stuff and we're going to switch over to wind and solar, and they ran into a lot of trouble as well, and we'll talk about that. But it kind of reminds me, it's kind of like the current situation. So I'm in California. Gas here is knocking on the door of $6 a gallon. So this, to me, which may feel cheap to you in Sweden, I don't know, but for us, it's expensive. And it has gone up. I mean, it is essentially doubled in the last 10 months. And so to paint the picture, and it kind of strikes me, it's sort of the same with a lot of the climate change people we're talking about. Biden comes in and he goes, so we are, for the first time, independent power-wise from a fossil fuel standpoint. Now, so America is, for the first time in ever, maybe 70 years, but ostensibly the first time ever, we're exporting power, fracking, natural gas, boom, we're putting it out. Then Biden comes in and he goes, no more of this. We're shutting down those pipelines, shutting down the drilling on federal lands and blah, blah, blah. And everyone goes, okay, what's the plan? And he says, no, we're just shutting it down. And so they shut it down, and then gas doubles, and now we're worried about having enough fuel, and then we're exporting it from the Saudis or the OPEC nations or whomever. And now it's like, well, that's not a plan. the plan can't be just shut down the nuclear power plant. The plan has to be shut down the nuclear power plant and then flip the on switch on the solar farm that's working magnificently. It can't just be, I'm against stuff. And I feel like that's the problem in general with the climate change people. Like, shut down the pipeline, shut down the fracking, shut down the nuclear power plant. Okay, now what? Oh, then we're going to import oil from the Russians.
Yes.
But that doesn't seem like a good plan.
And you get this, this almost bizarre situation that you have Biden calling the OPEC, essentially from the plane going to the climate summit and asking them, please produce more oil. And what that shows you is whenever the costs really start hitting consumers, most politicians back out of most of their expensive climate promises. It is not a good plan to simply say, I really care about the climate. I want to go all new. I want to go all renewable, unless it's actually costly, in which case I'm just going to renege on the whole thing. No, you have to find a plan that can survive a lot of Congresses and survive a lot of presidents and actually be stable towards a place where we'll emit a lot less carbon and be better off at the same time. This is not the plan that we're seeing right now.
What happened in Germany?
So Germany got very excited about the idea of they could lead the world on renewables, essentially. So they both wanted to get rid of nuclear. It only happened after Fukushima, if you remember the big tsunami that hit. And of course, that was a terrible tragedy. And in that context, Fukushima was a very small parenthesis for Japan, but it looked really scary. And so the chancellor in Germany said, let's also close all the nuclear power plants, which makes no sense because it's not like Germany is in any danger of a tsunami. But
right.
Anyway, so you have this situation that they want to go renewable. They have spent an enormous amount of money, so certainly above $500 billion in direct support in US dollars over the last 25 years. They have some of the highest energy costs in the world. And they have almost not cut their carbon emissions. Why? Because they also shut down their nuclear power plants. And of course, when you shut down that, most of it will be filled up with fossil fuels. So you have this absurd situation that the Germans have spent an enormous amount of money. They're incredibly proud of what they have achieved. They have cut a little bit of CO2, but not very much, at enormous cost. That is not a way to showcase to the world, here's how to do it. If anything, it shows most people how not to do it.
And didn't they have to cut the deal with Russia to do the pipeline?
Yes, of course. We're also now actually hugely dependent on Russia for gas because you can't run solar and wind right now without having backup. Remember, what are you going to do when there's no wind or there's no sun? A lot of people sort of casually suggest, batteries. But right now, the whole world has less batteries, and remember, most of these are actually now electric cars, less batteries than to store 1 minute of our electricity consumption. You just can't make this up. We cannot, in any realistic time frame, imagine that we would be able to sort of store for weeks or even months the necessary power, and that's why you need gas as an intermediate fuel, and that's of course why you need Russia, because Biden is not producing enough, and because Europe essentially said, we don't want to frack.
Is this a fair statement to just sort of look at the whole thing kind of philosophically, which is we have a technology that runs our modern society that's, 100 plus years old, oil fuel essentially. And we haven't liked that notion for a long time because it feels old and it feels dirty. So we have said we're going to push toward the future with solar and wind and hydrothermal or whatever we're proposing. And voices like you have said, well, good for you, but we're not there yet. So we can't just push there. We're not there yet. And I think the voices who champion it are sort of going, well, we're not there yet, but the only way we're going to get there is to make gas $10 a gallon and really make things hard on people who choose to drive a car with an internal combustion engine in it or run a power plant off of coal or whatever it is. Once we squeeze that hard enough, that'll get us there more quickly. But like as we've seen in Germany, it doesn't seem to get us there. They get rid of one thing, the future doesn't work, and next thing you know, there's a pipeline going to Russia.
Yep. And a lot of coal being burned in Germany again. So you're absolutely right. Look, you can't just do wishful statements and hope somehow you'll arrive there. And I think that's to a very large extent what's happened. You've said, we really, really, really want to get there. So, let's just rush there. No, that's not a plan, just like you pointed out before. I think the second part is that in some way, we better just try to rush as fast ahead as we can until somebody like Trump comes and disrupts the whole thing. And I guess that politically makes a slight bit of sense. But the reality again here is if you want to do something for 2050, you can't make policies that drive gasoline up so high that people are just going to vote against it. They're just going to elect Bolsonaros all around instead and just protest against this kind of thing. And then you'll be back to square one or almost back to square one. You have to find a way that's both cheap enough that most people will accept it and that's smart enough that this will actually succeed. And unfortunately, that means you can't do this tomorrow.
What is in the future? What do you know? So a couple things. I don't hold a lot of faith out for, government and politicians, but there are entrepreneur scientists like Elon Musk. I mean, he's not a scientist, but possibly he is. I don't know how to define him, but the point is I feel like guys like that are going to solve this problem for us with technology. And I've talked before about ways to create power sort of beyond nuclear, but sort of with elements of that in it. Is there some technology that may be waiting for us in the future to either create the power and or to scrub the air, the carbon capture, things? Musk has talked about it before. And I do believe that guys like you and I are sort of more like, look, it's not that the climate isn't going to change. It's just we're going to innovate. The sea may rise, we'll build a seawall. It may get hotter in Arizona, we'll have more air conditioning. That's kind of my head on it. I don't know, for some reason it feels ugly to people who are constantly talking about innovation. Not sure why they're not into that innovation. They're into their innovation. It has to do with windmills, which doesn't really feel innovative to me. It feels kind of old to me. But what's your take? Is there something looming on the horizon from a technological standpoint that might be a game changer?
So I'm going to tell you one exciting story, and then I'm going to give sort of a warning sign around this. So yes, I think there's some exciting opportunities, and you're absolutely right that Elon Musk could be that one guy who just invents this amazing thing that'll save us all. So Craig Venter, the guy who cracked the human genome back in 2000, he has this idea of taking essentially gene-modified algae and spread them in the ocean surface and let them soak up sunlight and CO2 and produce oil. Then we harvest them out on the ocean surface, and we basically run our entire fossil fuel economy off of this oil. Remember, it just soaked up the CO2 on the ocean surface, so essentially this is carbon neutral. This could be an amazing statement of how the world could work out. There's a lot of reason to believe that this might not happen. It's certainly not commercially viable yet, but this is one of the many sort of slightly wacky ideas by really smart people that could work. But I want to sort of place a marker and say, I think we have to be careful not to believe that just one Elon Musk could do the whole thing. If you look, for instance, on the iPhone, which sort of iconically was produced by what's his name? Sorry, I'm just forgetting his name.
Jobs. Steve Jobs.
Thank you. Yes. If we just look at his innovation, it was made possible by an enormous amount of grants mostly from DARPA and other places, a lot of other inventions that he then brought together into this amazing piece of product called the iPhone.
Right.
That came out of a lot of university funding, a lot of science funding, and that's what we need also in order to facilitate the Elon Musks of the world to make their amazing breakthroughs. So what we have to do is to make sure that we fund a lot of the basic research. We do this, for instance, on medical science. We recognize that the big pharmaceuticals are not going to sort of magically pop up products out of nowhere. They come out of all the Nobel, science research that have fostered for another 30 years in academia, and then eventually opens up for something that can then both generate lots of profits and benefit humankind. We need the same kind of thing, because unless we have that innovation, we're not going to get to the place where you can make that, shouldn't we do that algae in the ocean surface, or these many, many other ideas. So essentially, we need the backup framework for Elon Musk and his likes.
Solar versus wind. It strikes me that wind, it doesn't seem to have the promise that people were enthusiastic about it several years ago. Doesn't seem to be as viable as it was sold or ostensibly as we discussed, years ago. Solar versus wind, which one has more promise down the road? So
you live in California, so solar is probably more profitable there. It's certainly terrible here in Sweden, but likewise, it's almost always windy. So wind is a better idea here. It's probably also a better idea out at sea, where you can have sort of consistently high velocities. But the trick to both of these is to recognize that you have very predictable low solar every evening, but you also have in the wintertime, and you also have days or even weeks when it's overcast. And you similarly have the problem with wind, that you can get into these doldrums, and very often at exactly the same time when it's either very cold or very hot, where you need the power the most.
Headspace, thoughts running in circles. What if a few minutes is all it took to change your stress and anxiety, transforming your life? That's the power of meditation with Headspace. Thoughts are confusing enough. Meditation doesn't have to be. Headspace, convenient dose of meditation, mindfulness, and sleep exercises to relieve stress and help you get a good night's sleep, all in one app. One of the most science-backed meditation apps in the world. A study proves in just 2 weeks, Headspace can reduce stress by 14%. People, it's a crazy world out there. You're going to have to carve out a little sanity for yourself with Headspace, right, Dawson?
Find some Headspace at headspace.com/Adam and get 1 month free of their entire meditation library. This is the best Headspace offer available. So go to headspace.com/Adam today, headspace.com/Adam.
All right, Bjorn, we talk a lot about climate. We talk a lot about power. We could talk about COVID, because you living in Sweden did something that I think kind of surprised the world, certainly in the United States, is they took a much more sort of level-headed and less reactive approach to COVID. And we now have this, we meaning us in the United States, now have this weird relationship with Sweden. It's kind of weird. It's sort of like the relationship we have with Bill Maher. It's like, wait a minute, I thought he was one of us. Well, now he's saying things that seem like they're coming from the other side. Well, what do we do with him now? And that's how we are in Sweden. My whole life's been, I grew up with a hippie mom. In Sweden, they walk around nude, and the children drink wine, and everything is fine, and they have health care, and, blah, 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 Sweden. And now Sweden goes, we're not shutting down the schools, and we're not going to quarantine people or lock people in their house. And now we in the United States, we're like, well, what do we think of Sweden now? We don't know, because they're going against our crazy reactionary stuff that we embrace so much. But Sweden, we don't hear anything about Sweden in the United States anymore. So the way our news works out here, and sorry for the rant, Bjorn, but it's what we do is we go, Texas is not going to have mask mandates. Florida's not going to have mask mandates. Get the body bags. They're going to have full stadiums with 90,000 people. Oh, this is going to be a feast for COVID. So it's Florida, Texas, Florida, and then nothing happens, and you never hear another goddamn word about Texas or Florida. We do the same, which means it worked out fine for Texas and Florida, or relatively fine compared to California, where everything got locked down, and we ended up in the same place. We ended up with the same result, maybe even a little better in Florida and Texas than we did in California, except we locked everyone up and they didn't. Sweden, it was all talk about, Sweden's not locking down. They haven't closed their schools. No updates, really, because the updates crap on their points and then hurt their argument for further lockdowns and other government overreach policies. But you live there, so tell us.
Well, I mean, it's always dangerous just to rely on a single impression. But yes, Sweden, for a variety of reasons, partly constitutional, they couldn't shut down. I'm pretty sure the politicians would have liked to have done that, but they can't. And so basically, Sweden ended up doing what actually was in most of the pandemic procedures that have been agreed before COVID, that you tell people they have to, stay at home if they're sick. They have to get tested as soon as they have a suspicion that there's something wrong. They have to, keep socially distancing. But we're not going to shut down schools because that's where kids learn. And it's very unlikely that kids are the main place that you transfer COVID. Also, and we're seeing this now, if you make it really scary with kids and COVID during the pandemic, it becomes really hard to open up the schools later on, which is what a lot of nations are now realizing. How do we do this and say, now it's safe for your kid to go back to school? And likewise, of course, there's the whole economic issue. How much do you want to shut down a society? The more you shut down, the costlier it is. The more you also save on COVID, but you have to make a balance here again. And I think slightly inadvertently, Sweden got a lot of it right. They did get some things dramatically wrong. For instance, there was way too much infection that got into old people's homes, which is one of the reasons why Sweden had a lot of deaths at the outset. But Sweden ended up pretty good in a European league. It was not the best. Denmark and Norway had much better outcomes. But again, we're talking in the order of 10,000 people that died more in Sweden compared to Norway and Denmark together, which is about the same population. And you had a civilization or a nation that didn't have to lock down. Inadvertently, some researchers actually got to ask people, how much would you be willing to pay to avoid being locked down for different amounts of time? And what it turned out was that the entire amount of extra mortality is outweighed by the fact that people were willing to pay for that just for avoiding 8 weeks of lockdown. As if you've lived through a lockdown, you probably can understand. And most of our kids have actually learned a full year, unlike many other places that have had extensive distance learning, which we now know learns almost nothing.
Well, we also have a problem here in California, which is we do things such as shut the schools down, and then we react in a way that is way overblown. And it's always safety first. So we lock everything down and we cancel school for a year plus. Then later on, when the science comes out, or when the other examples, Sweden and Florida and other places that didn't shut down their school for a year, the data starts coming out. And it turns out shutting down schools is not a great idea. Schools aren't a great vector for transmission. It was a bad idea. They were wrong. Now they have a problem. They can admit they were wrong, or they can double down and keep explaining about why. I hear these talking heads from the CDC on the news every night saying, well, you got to get your 5-year-old vaccinated so it's safe to open schools. And then we get them vaccinated so they can return to school safely. And it's like, what data suggests this? What other places are doing this? How come in Europe they're not doing this and their schools are open? So now they have to justify their horrible idea and essentially build a time machine to retroactively make themselves correct, because there will be other situations that crop up from time to time, and we're going to go to them for answers. And when we find out they're wrong about everything, we're going to stop listening to them. So now you get essentially, there's two punishments. You get punished because they close the school for a year, and then you get punished again because they have to justify the first punishment. So now they then enact a bunch of, they're hanging plexiglass from fishing string, from a ceiling, and people are talking around it because they can't hear the person that's on the other side. This has nothing to do with science. They're literally taking a virus that will push right through a mask or a piece of cloth or gaiter over your mouth, and we're hanging a piece of plexiglass in front of the teacher. This is insane, but they have to do it. It's all theater, and it's to justify the initial bad decisions they make. And you do see that with climate as well. They make a bad decision, and then they'll have to double down on it.
Well, we certainly see this with climate. So, the United Nations new climate summit is going to go on for the next 2 weeks in Glasgow. And it's the 26th meeting. And one of the things you should take away from that is, all right, so we've had 25 meetings before that didn't work. And I'm always, really surprised about the way that a lot of people are saying, climate is going to destroy us all. We're going to destroy the world. We got to do something. So let's do the stuff that hasn't worked for the last 30 years. What? If you really care about this, why wouldn't you do something that works better? So the UN actually did a study of how much did the last decade, so the 2010s, actually do for climate? How much did the climate policies we enacted, so Paris and all that other stuff, they tell us that it's a lost decade. That's their words, lost decade. And they say, we can't tell the difference from the world that we actually live in and a world where we hadn't bothered at all with climate since 2005. That's got to make you wonder, right? So all of the stuff that we've done through Obama and now with Biden and all the other promises, Paris Agreement and all the other stuff, we can't tell the difference. That tells you that you've got to go a different direction than just this other one where we're going to all meet up and promise lots of stuff and then break it when we come home.
Here may be a difference between Sweden and the United States. Sweden is just as much in on climate as the United States is, maybe more so, as you stated at the beginning of the interview. But the United States, and I don't know if Sweden feels this way, we feel, even though we're a small percentage of, we have 330 million people, the planet has, 7-8 billion people on it. We think we can control the entire planet with our minority of people over here, which is just kind of America being America. Like, listen, the adults are in charge. Listen, world, we'll dictate. We'll fix things. We treat it like it's World War II. All right, we're going to have to come in here and mop up, take care of these people because they're incapable of doing it for themselves. But Sweden is such a small nation compared to the United States. Do they still have that feeling? I know Greta Thunberg is up there stumping. Yes. Do they feel this weird empowerment like we do?
So I think, not Sweden. Sweden is way too small, but the EU is, it's a pretty big bloc of 450 million people. But I think they also feel like, what else are we going to do? This is their way of creating an identity, something that we are doing and that we are known for. I'm always very surprised about the fact, back in 2000, or just after 2000, the EU decided that it was going to become the most innovative economy in the world. It also decided it was basically going to go net zero by 2050, not quite those words. It did this. It did the climate bit, which is costing a lot of money. It did not do the innovation bit. So the thing that's actually going to feed us, the thing that's actually going to drive economic growth so that we can afford all these plentiful promises, we never followed through on. And I think that's the real problem. You can't just have a policy of we want to be known for the ones who make the most restrictions for ourselves. That's not going to be sexy. That's not something people will want to replicate. So in that sense, I think EU feels like they're a moral lighthouse for the world. But in reality, I think they're, to a very large extent, a scary example of what happens if you just focus on climate and forget all the other things that are important if you want a good society.
Are voices like your own, and you tell us about your personal experience, the folks that are constantly talking AOC over here and Greta Thunberg and stuff, they don't like voices like your own because they're all sort of visceral and emotionally based and talking doom and gloom, and you're more practical and pragmatic, and then you get labeled a climate denier, which, as we spoke about, it's about the same as they do with it look no further than the governor of Florida. The governor of Florida in the United States said, I'm not shutting down schools. I'm not making mask mandates. You may, by the way, choose to wear a mask or not wear a mask, but I'm not going to make it a mandate. We're not going to do vax mandates, and you should get vaxxed, but I'm not going to make it a mandate that you get vaxxed. And he was excoriated. All right, we destroyed him. The media destroyed him because we don't like measured kind of dealing with reality on reality's terms kinds of voices in the middle of our sort of emotional, I've got the vapors breakdown. So they're having this sort of religious experience, which is essentially driven by atheists, but it's still a religious experience with COVID or climate change. They're having a religious experience, all again driven by agnostics and atheists, and then you are the agnostic who comes in the room and tells them to cool down, and they don't like it. Because they're speaking in tongues at this point.
Look, one of the things I keep trying to do is to give data into this conversation that's very much driven by emotion. So remember how everyone saw the absolutely terrifying heat waves up in the heat dome in northwest U.S. and Canada, how we saw floodings in Germany, how we saw floodings in China and lots of other places. You've seen all these terrible incidences, and people have the sense that we're now seeing more and more and more catastrophes. Well, actually, we have a very, very good database for all of that. We know how many people die from climate-related disasters of floods, droughts, storms, wildfires, and extreme temperatures. And we know this for the last 100 years. And if you actually look at it, 100 years ago, about 500,000 people died from these disasters every year. This year, it's obviously not done, but if you we have data till the end of October. If you take this year and make it full year, we will see less than 7,000 people die. So more than a 99% reduction in climate-related disaster deaths. Why? Because rich societies are resilient and able to protect its citizens. Even if there is more, and I would argue that's very unplausible for many of these, that if there are more climate catastrophes. But what you have to remember is, yes, there are more heat deaths, but there are fewer cold deaths. Yes, there are some places that get flooded. There are many places that don't get flooded anymore because we have technology, and on and on. We have seen a reduction of more than 99% deaths over the last century because of technology, because of growth. And telling people this is the end of the world, as Greta Thunberg and many others are telling us, not because of the data, but because it feels that way when you watch TV, is not a good way to inform ourselves. And of course, it's a terrible way to make decisions, because if you're panicked, you end up making bad decisions.
Well, it strikes me that I spoke about it as a religion, and I do mean it that way. I literally, what I'm saying is we're biological, emotional beings, and we're all the same in the sense that we wish and desire this or that. Religion is around for a reason. The religion is everywhere for a reason. We're human beings. There's something attractive about it, obviously, just on a very basic sort of biological level. We as human beings are attracted to religion. So, and I've talked to Dr. Drew about this a lot, because if you think about, the rapture, that's something that's every religion basically says, one day there'll be a reckoning, and if you were righteous, then you'll be fine. You'll go to heaven. But if you weren't, there's going to be a problem. Because a religion wouldn't really work if you said, look, don't drink and don't covet your neighbor's oxen, and then you die and nobody cares. That's not really good selling. That's not a good sale for a religion. And that's why they all kind of have this thing. It's like you're selling a condominium timeshare in Florida. You can't go, it's going to be a big money suck and you'll probably never go there. You have to go, you pay, but then picture you and your family in a beautiful day. Has to be something at the end of the rainbow for you. And as I see the world, Europe, the United States becoming less and less religious statistically over the years, I feel like many of these other causes, climate change or Black Lives Matter, or whatever it is, have come in and kind of filled the void. And the thing about Armageddon and religion, well, think about Al Gore and everyone saying, we have 8 years, by 2010, this is going to happen. We'll have, it's the apocalypse. They're essentially, all the tenets are the same in a religion, and many of the people that are very deeply ensconced in the whole climate change situation. And I would reckon that most of the people that are very caught up in this are sort of atheists and or agnostic, or not deeply devout Christians, Catholics, and beyond. Do you have thoughts on that?
I certainly think there's an aspect of this, and my take on this is that a lot of people want to feel like they're the generation that matters.
Right.
And obviously, in this civilization, it is, I'm going to be one of those that helps solve climate, to avoid the catastrophe. That makes me feel important, my life validated. It's a little bit like living, during the just before the Second World War kind of thing. I stood up against fascism. That's something you want to, put on your tombstone kind of thing.
Right.
That's something you want to tell your grandkids about. And the same way with climate, they're making this incredible story so that you can fight it and you were on the righteous side of this. But of course, the reality is most people want cheap and abundant electricity and power in general. That's what's going to take them out of poverty. Most of that is going to be fossil fuels in at least the coming decades. And most people are unwilling to pay a huge amount of money for this. So you're selling this whole, it's the end of the world. In order to convince everyone at the same time, they have to pony up with all this money. But it's not actually true. Remember, the UN Climate Panel itself tells us if we did nothing about climate, the net impact by the end of the century would be equivalent to each one of us losing 2.6% of our income. That's not nothing, but remember, by then, the UN also expects each one of us will be 450% as rich as he or she is today. So instead of being 450% as rich, we'll only be 434% as rich. Yes, it's a problem. No, it's not the end of the world. This isn't sexy. This is not the kind of thing you want to give up for your life. It just happens to be the way that we're actually going to make the world a lot better. We're going to fix climate smartly, but we're also going to recognize that there are many other problems that are much more important and where we can do a lot more good.
Are there more voices like your own that are starting to peek their head out without worrying about it being hit with a golf club? Because I liken a lot of it. I see so many similarities. I'm in California to COVID and climate, which is a year and a half ago. I said, this thing is killing old people and it's killing sick people, and the rest of you pussies got played, and everyone went berserk. But there are more and more people now kind of raising up, kind of going, I don't think we need to shit. I mean, you see it with the vax mandate stuff, with the passports and stuff. People are starting to push back. A lot of voices that you thought maybe were opposite of yours are sort of saying things that maybe sound a little more familiar to some of the thoughts you've had. You've been kind of out there on an island with this subject, and lots of slings and arrows coming your way. But have you noticed a little trend or a turn, or people starting to be a little more pragmatic about this?
I think there's a lot of people who, secretly or privately hold these views and realize how that this is the smart way to think about it. I do think that you're still going to be hit with a big club over your head if you lift it out of the parapet. So a lot of people are still holding back. I think one of the things that is going to change this is now the costs are starting to become real. Remember, 10, 20 years ago, most politicians could just simply say, the world is going to end, but if you vote for me, I will save you, with stuff that's going to be paid later on. So they basically got to get all the benefits, but not actually have to pay. Now we have to start paying. And what you're seeing with the energy crisis is it's partly because of climate, it's partly because of a lot of other reasons, but it's very indicative of what we're going to see in the future. If you're going to fix climate change, you have to make gas, coal, oil much more expensive. And when you do that, you will get the kind of upraising when people say, look, I'm in for, I'm willing to give a couple $100 for this, but I'm not willing to give a couple $1,000. You must be crazy. I'm going to vote for someone else. I think that is going to happen simply because the data is not there. It's a problem, not the end of the world. And the solutions are not there yet. We don't have the technology with solar and wind, for instance, without lots and lots of batteries that we can't afford. What we need is a lot more innovation.
Would you, lastly, agree with this analysis? So we're talking about energy. So California gas is, like I said, so it's $5, starting to get over $5, certain places, goes up weekly, it seems. And for guys like me, I make a lot of money, so it's not impactful to me. It just isn't. I'm annoyed by it, but I'm sort of annoyed on behalf of poor people. It's not really something that affects me. And I'm not being cavalier. It's like you could take the price of milk and you could double the price of milk. It doesn't affect me because I'm not in a tax bracket that would be bothered by it. But it does affect poor guys driving gardener's trucks. I mean, these guys are driving full-size trucks. They're loaded with equipment. They don't live in great neighborhoods. They have to drive, long distances into nicer neighborhoods to get paid. I saw a couple of these guys in their truck filling up at a gas station by my house. The look on their face, when that thing got to $100, impactful for them, very impactful. I'm right next to them filling up, not impactful for me. Could you liken that to sort of developing nations and fossil fuel? We're sitting over here going, just eat it. Just suck it up. Just make a solar farm. Put up a windmill. Come on, get some batteries. And they're like, we don't have money. We're trying to get out of this.
So look, a lot of climate policies are a little bit like that. Subsidies to electric cars, that's almost entirely subsidies to rich people. To be able to drive around these nice Teslas and feel virtue signaling at the same time. The same thing with solar panels, and the same thing with energy prices. So New York Times actually did a survey a couple of years ago looking at where people spend the most on gas. It's of course not in rich, well-meaning New York City, where people habitually say, the gas price should go up to $20 per gallon or something like that. It's easy to say when you have a metro right outside your house, but it's the people, especially in poor places like Tennessee and New Orleans, where they have, Louisiana, where you have to go long distances, where perhaps even a quarter of your income goes to paying for gas. Those are the people who are really dramatically hit, just like in the developing world, where the only way out of poverty is if you have lots of energy. That's how we got out of poverty, and that's how they're going to come out of poverty. So yes, it's very easy to sit and be, self-pleased rich person and say, we should do something about global warming. Let's ramp up the costs. Sure, for you, but not for everyone else.
All right. The book, False Alarm, How Climate Change Panic Costs Us Trillions, Hurts the Poor, and Fails to Fix the Planet. It's available on Amazon. It's been available on Amazon, but now just released in paperback. Bjorn Lomborg, thanks for joining us. Always a pleasure to speak to you, my friend.
Likewise. Thank you.
All right. And then there's LifeLock. Tech support scams trick you into believing something is wrong, and then they steal your personal information, tap your bank account, or install dangerous software on your device. It's important to understand how cybercrime and identity theft are affecting our lives every day. We put our info at risk on the internet. In an instant, cyber criminals could harm your finances and your credit. Good thing there's LifeLock. LifeLock helps detect a wide range of identity threats like your social security number for sale on the dark web. If they detect your information is out there, they'll send you an alert. So protect yourself with LifeLock. Right, Dawson?
No one can prevent all identity theft or monitor all transactions at all businesses, but you can keep what's yours with LifeLock Identity Theft Protection. Join now and save up to 25% off your first year with promo code ADAM. Call 1-800-LifeLock or head to lifelock.com. Use promo code ADAM for 25% off.
Had to be liberating for the dogs that are traditionally used in dog fighting to just sit back, pull up a chair, and watch people fighting.
Yeah. Many
I don't know if there's some
commented about
gambling
that on
going down. I don't know if they're hedging bets. Like, I don't know who their favorites were,
Yeah.
but it's a little turnabout, you know, and it's kind of
absolutely.
refreshing.